Well, welcome everyone to our presentation today. I'm joined by my colleague Katie Schmidt from American Rivers, who's going to be talking about FERC-regulated hydropower dams and removal of those dams. Before we get started, I want to quickly introduce myself for those of you who may not know me. My name is Colleen McNally Murphy. I'm the National Director for the Hydropower Reform Coalition based out in California. And I've been in this role for about 5 years, working closely with colleagues from different Hydropower Reform Coalition member organizations. And for the last couple of years, I have had the privilege of supervising Katie Schmidt, co-supervising with Brian Graber, who's also here, as she did a deep dive research project into removal of hydropower dams. We realized that there was a lot of information on the dam removal side of things, and there was a lot of information on the hydropower sort of licensing side of things, but there was this missing piece where those two things come together. So this presentation is really focused on what I'll call like getting to yes, like the approval to do the removal. It's not the actual engineering nuts and bolts, right? But, so with that, I'll turn it over to Katie for an introduction of herself, and then I'll talk about some of the sort of resources and next steps before we dive into the presentation.
Thank you, Colleen. And hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us here today. I'm really excited to be with you, especially for the HRC that I've worked really closely with so many members of the HRC so far for the last few years. My name is Katie Schmidt. I'm the Associate Director of our National Dam Removal Program now. I was in a fellowship with American Rivers for 2 years before this position, where Colleen and Brian were my incredible supervisors and editors and tireless champions of this work and this research. So I'm so grateful for them to both be here when we're presenting this to the public. In my role as Associate Director, I oversee our federal policy agenda for dam removal, and I get to work closely with our federal agency partners in their dam removal work practice. And I also support our national community of practice of dam removal practitioners. And I get to help develop and support tools such as this practitioner's guide to help dam removal practitioners across the country expand and hone in on their work on dam removal. So I'll pass it back to you, Colleen, if you'd like. We've got a couple HRC announcements too.
Yeah, perfect. I just wanted to share a couple of things that you might want to be aware of. So we have a FERC Licensing 101 training coming up on January 16th. That is going to be led by myself and Mark Zakatansky with the Appalachian Mountain Club. He's the chair of our Eastern Caucus. We also are under development is a Hydropower Licensing 101 toolkit that we're developing in coordination with River Management Society and the National Park Service. So there's information right now on the River Management Society website, but there's going to be more coming out, especially on the HRC website. And then we have the HRC Resource Library, which has just a ton of information. If anyone is interested in checking that out, we have relevant court decisions, and we have hydropower guides, and we have summaries of specific hydropower licenses, and there's all sorts of stuff in there. Academic articles on methane emissions. It's a broad ranging hub of information. So check that out. And also, we've had some new people join us, so welcome, and feel free to pop a quick introduction of yourself in the chat if you like, so we have a sense of who y'all are today. A couple other things I wanted to mention for folks who may be new to the HRC. If you're interested in becoming a member of the coalition, I would love to talk with you about that. There's information on how to join on our website. It's fairly straightforward. And then I also want to flag that American Rivers has a great dam removal community of practice. So that is something, if you have questions about that, I will direct you to Brian Graber or Katie, who I'm sure can also answer lots of questions. And there is, I believe, a series of trainings and presentations coming up through that community of practice, which maybe Katie, I don't know if you want to touch on some of the topics or just keep moving.
We can just keep moving. It's all right.
Great. Then I think that's it. Over to you.
Okay, thanks, Colleen. Okay, so I want to give an overview quickly of the HRC and American Rivers because this work would not be possible without the collaboration between HRC and AR. So the Hydropower Reform Coalition is this incredible group of over 160 organizations that are working on hydropower reform across the nation. They're deeply involved in hydropower relicensing, looking at new licenses and helping folks surrender their licenses of projects and remove them. And American Rivers is a national river conservation organization that works to protect and restore rivers and has been participating in the dam removal field for 25 years and has removed over 300 dams. So it's wonderful, like Colleen said, working with these both organizations was really important in being able to merge the expertise of the Hydropower Reform Coalition in the licensing and federally regulated hydropower world with the dam removal expertise of American Rivers that brings you the guide that we're here to talk about today. So before we get too deep in it, I want to invite you all to be present today. I know that we all have really, really busy lives and it's sometimes hard to focus, but now is a great time to close any extra web browsers that are maybe up. You can silence your phone and put it out of reach. Just unplug from everybody else for a moment and plug in for just an hour today to dive into this really important subject. As we're going through, please feel free to put questions into the chat or into the Q&A feature since we have both of them. And we will have a wonderful discussion after this. So we're going to dive in. Today we have three main topics that we're going into. We are going to do an overview of dams and dam removal in the United States. We'll do why hydropower dams are removed, specifically why dam owners are deciding to remove their dams. And then we're going to dive into navigating the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission process, mostly known as FERC. So my goal today is to arm you with information. We're doing an overview of the process. This is not, like Colleen said, we're not going to get into the technicality of how to physically remove a dam. We are exploring how to get to yes. The Practitioner's Guide to Hydropower Dam Removal has a lot more details. And if your questions aren't answered by this webinar and the guide, reach out to me. I would love to hear your questions. So we're going to go ahead and dive into dams and dam removal. What you're looking at now is a map of dams of the United States. There are over 90,000 in the national inventory of dams. In reality, there are over 500,000 dams. So if you look at this map and squint your eyes a little bit and multiply it by 5, that's the real number that we're working with. Many are serving a public purpose, many are not, many are reaching the end of their expected life, and dam owners are starting more and more to start removing them for public safety benefit and for environmental benefit. There are over 2,000 dam removals that have happened across the United States. This is a reasonable approach to end-of-life care for dams, and there are a lot of experts out there who are well practiced, and there are even more growing in the field. So removing dams, especially ones that are outdated and unsafe, is a really economical and effective solution for eliminating dam owner liability and improving river health, and that's one of the main reasons why we're seeing people choose to remove their projects. This is a map of dams removed across the United States. There's not quite an even distribution, but we're working on evening that out as we go. But like I said, over 2,000 dams have been removed. This is not a new wild notion anymore. This is a common sense approach to end-of-life care for dams. And we're here talking about hydropower dams because they are unique from a normal dam removal. All dams are complicated, or all dam removals are complicated. All of them require dam owner consent, permitting, fundraising, design plans, contractors, community engagement, PR, what have you. There is a lot that goes into a dam removal. Hydropower dam removals have all of that and going through the FERC process. So all hydropower dams have licenses or exemptions from licenses. and those need to be surrendered. And FERC oftentimes will need to approve the dam removal plans before you can go through them. So all of this getting to yes is a bigger process when it comes to hydropower dam removals. And I do want to clarify that today we are only talking about federally regulated hydropower dams. We are not talking about removing federal hydropower dams. That's a different ballgame. Every federal agency that has dams has its own individual practice of how they remove them. We're not doing that today. We're talking about FERC-regulated hydropower dams only. So that's our difference. And then this is our map of hydropower dams that have been removed in the United States. 46 of them and counting. Many of these are probably names that you haven't heard of, and that's okay. I'm trying to make the point that this is not always a massive deal. They don't need to make national headlines, and everyone can do this. We're here to help practitioners. We're here to help dam owners. It is a complicated process and a very doable process. Speaking of big dam removals, though, I do want to emphasize that the largest dam removal in the country is happening right now. The Klamath River Restoration Project is removing 4 massive hydropower dams in the Klamath River in California and Oregon. We've already got 1 dam out. The other 3 are slated to have their removal start in January. We're really excited about this project and all of the implications of it. It's a huge restoration process, but it's not necessarily typical. Not all dam removals take over 20 years and international advocacy to get these dams out. So we're excited, and all dam removals are unique. And in the guide, you'll see that there's over 20 case studies to demonstrate the wide breadth of variety that dam removals can take, and the paths that people take to get there. All right. So that's our overview of dams and dam removal in the US. I'm going to take a sip of water. Okay, moving on. Why do people remove dams? I get this question a lot, especially outside of work, of like, why are you focused on removing hydropower dams? Aren't they good? And there's a lot that are generating power still, but there are a lot that are getting to the end of their useful life, and dam owners are making a decision about what to do with them. Most hydropower dams are quite old. The average FERC-regulated dam is about 93 years old. So they're aging infrastructure. Many are small and uneconomical, and a lot of them are removed because they're uneconomical, obsolete, or unsafe. All of these are removed with consent from the dam owners. So in addition to the general benefits of dam removal, hydropower dams are often larger. So by removing them, you can have more fish passage benefits. There's a lot that goes into it. These are the 3 main drivers that I found for why dam owners decided to remove. We have economics. That's the primary driver for dam removal. We have safety, which is a growing driver. It hasn't been the top driver for very many, but we're seeing this cited more and more in both hydro and non-hydro dam removals. And ecology is an underlying driver of almost all the dam removals that we've seen. So diving into economics, there are a couple factors that come into this. So while most hydropower dams are serving a purpose, are generating power, some have reached the end of their useful life, and/or operational costs exceed the revenue from their generation, making them economically marginal. So those dams can pose a greater risk to public safety because folks don't have the revenue to be able to maintain their projects. It becomes a public safety issue too. So sorry, if you don't have the revenue to maintain your project, it becomes a public safety issue. So those economically marginal projects are the ones that we're seeing more and more of owners decide to remove those projects. A Department of Energy study found that small projects that are authorized at a capacity of 10 megawatts or less, so we're talking our really small projects here, they have an operations and maintenance expenses that are 6 times greater than small projects. So small projects, they're much more expensive to maintain, they're economically marginal, and they're things that can push them over the edge to have that owner decide to remove, including the expenses of relicensing, our second bullet point here. Relicensing is something that happens every time, well, whenever the license expires for a hydropower project, the owner needs to decide whether or not they want to relicense. And going through that process, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission will require them to update their project to current environmental and safety standards. That can be very expensive, especially if your project is quite old and hasn't been updated in a while. The expenses associated with relicensing can take a project and put it into that area where it's economically marginal or uneconomical completely. So we're seeing that relicensing is actually the most common time when a dam owner decides to remove their project instead. I'm just going to repeat that one more time for this group. Relicensing is the most common time when a dam owner decides to remove. They're looking at the expenses of their project and everything that needs to go into it. And sometimes they have stakeholders that are talking to them and they're explaining, here's also what might come into relicensing. And they decide, okay, we are not going to do that now. We're going to retire our project, and stakeholders have stepped in and helped them identify dam removal as a feasible alternative to continually running an uneconomical project. I want to flag too, that between now and 2038, over 500 projects are set to have their licenses expire. So in the next 15 years, we have 500 projects that will, whose license will expire. Of those, over 400 are small projects. So we're building on our information. Small projects, 10 megawatts or less. O&M costs are much higher than in proportion than other projects. In the next 15 years, 4 out of 5 projects whose license will expire are small projects. We're going to have a lot of people start to consider what they're actually going to do with their projects. We're probably going to see more and more licensees that do not want to relicense and will be considering retiring them. And we can help them consider retirement and removal of their projects if they decide to go down that path. Aging infrastructure is another one that plays into economics. It's a safety factor as well, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But aging infrastructure, in a nutshell, is it needs to be maintained, it needs to be upgraded. In addition to that, you can have the reservoirs start to fill with sediment, which impacts generational capacity. And even removing the sediment is expensive. So there are additional costs when you have aging infrastructure. And like we already covered, FERC-regulated hydropower projects on average are over 90 years old. So a lot of those folks are dealing with really old projects. We even have one that's actually 220 years old. I can't remember where it is. I think it's in England, but there's some old projects out there. And the last one that we want to talk about with economics is changing markets. I read a couple different reports from the Department of Energy to get this data, and they have an even newer one out now that they just released. But basically, energy markets are changing. We're seeing we're trying to get off of oil, we're trying to get off of coal, we're trying to get into renewable energy, but still hydropower is decreasing in value in some areas. And smaller projects especially are struggling to remain profitable, which means that they are not able to then go back and maintain their projects, and they're considering retirement and removal. So all of those factors come into pushing economics to the top reason why people are deciding to remove a project. And I want to emphasize that the hydropower industry knows this. I work fairly closely with folks from the hydropower industry, and also there was a survey of the hydropower industry and licensees. This survey came out in 2020, and it found that 30% of licensees were considering surrendering their project and removing it. 30%, and all of those listed economics as the primary driver for that decision. So they know what their projects are at. Ones that are economical will continue running and will continue serving the communities that they're operating in. Ones that are not, the dam owners want to remove. All right, that's a deep dive in economics for us. Let's move on to safety. So safety is another rising factor. It's not normally the primary driver, but it is in a few cases. There are a few different issues. We can have structural dam safety. So structural components and hydromechanical equipment, those will degrade over time. They can require costly rehabilitation or replacement. And I mentioned this in the previous slide, most design life of most dams is 50 to 100 years old. And we're starting to see signs of aging in many projects across the country. In addition to structural integrity and aging, impacts of climate change are very much affecting hydropower projects. And, I mean, they're affecting all dams, but especially hydropower projects. We're seeing the increased flooding events. start to impact dams and have more wear and tear on them. And we're seeing spillway capacity being listed more and more common as a safety concern and a reason for folks to remove the dams. I have the Sabine Dam pictured on this slide for a reason. This is one of 3 dams that was removed on the Boardman River, all for safety. It ultimately, ecology factored into it, but the licensee decided that all of these needed very, very expensive upgrades to maintain safety. They could not pass the probable maximum flood. And so they decided we're going to retire these projects, and they worked with the dam owners to remove them. Low-head dams are our last element of dam safety. I want to bring these up because it's not a reason yet, but it might be more in the future. Low-head dams are the biggest safety concern with dams. They are a standing hazard. So many, and they're part of many, many hydropower projects. There was one in North Carolina that actually killed 15 people before it was removed. And across the country, over 1,400 people have died at low-head dams. Low-head dams are usually smaller dams where as the water is flowing into the reservoir, it continually flows out and over the crest of the dam. And so at the base of the dam, you have this recirculating wave where people who are recreating around or near the dam can get trapped and they can't get out. So this is even elevated to the FEMA's National Dam Safety Program. They are trying to figure out how we can address low-head dam safety. And a lot of times removal is the main thing that people are focusing on, removing low-head dams that are no longer serving a purpose. All right. Ecology, the final one that I have a feeling for this crowd might be the more familiar topic. So we have three main areas: fish passage, mitigation, and critical habitat. This is a big driver for why folks such as HRC members get involved in hydropower dam removals or get involved in relicensing. But we're going to talk about fish passage first. These are a really important part of balancing hydropower use with the public needs. So effective fish passage is necessary in many areas, and it needs to be evaluated during every relicensing. How this happens is U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service or NOAA or both, they'll come in and they'll assess the project and the necessary fish passage, and they can prescribe fish passage requirements. And then the licensee has to meet those requirements. It'll get incorporated into the new license, the terms of the new license, and the licensee can either decide to do that or to meet those requirements by removing the dam. I will note here that the prescriptions usually require support and information from tribes and stakeholders. NOAA and Fish and Wildlife Service are incredible agencies, and they're at max capacity. So anything that stakeholders can do to help them to elevate, hey, this project is up for relicensing and we'd like an examination of these species on this river and the impacts of the dam or anything to that effect that we can do to help them with evaluating necessary fishway prescriptions, can assist in having a fuller picture of the impacts of that dam so that the dam owner knows, what is going to come up with relicensing. I also want to note that it's not limited to being enforced during relicensing. There are a couple triggers if fish are starting to come to the base of a dam where maybe they weren't before. Say there's been downstream dam removals or a downstream dam has installed fish passage. That's another category in which fish passage might get triggered to be required at that dam. And we've seen that at a dam, specifically one in Maine on the Sacarapa Dam. That was not in the middle of relicensing, but the downstream dam had fish passage installed. And as soon as fish hit the bottom of the dam, that triggered a requirement for them to have fish passage, and they decided to remove instead. Our second bullet is on mitigation. Dam removals can be used for mitigating the impacts of other projects, and there are 2 main ways that we've seen this. We've seen dam removals, including hydropower dam removals, removed as mitigation banks. This is specifically in North Carolina, though other states are looking to incorporate these practices in their areas. And then the other one is where a dam owner or licensee owns multiple projects in a smaller area, and they can remove one dam to mitigate for the impacts of the other projects. So we've seen that a couple of times. And the last one is critical habitat. this has not been a primary driver. It's been a supporting driver for dam removal. Critical habitat is determined by the presence of threatened or endangered species or the potential use of the area by those species. I wanted to show here the photo of Fossil Creek Dam. This is a big project in Arizona where critical habitat was a supporting driver for removing this dam, along with cultural significance for the Apache Nation and for ecological benefits for endangered species that lived in that area. Okay, we've covered the field of dam removal, field of dams. We've covered why people get to deciding to remove a dam. And now they get to do the fun stuff of navigating the FERC process. So here we're going to cover quickly FERC's role, license surrender, and then timing, because timing is very, very fun and important. All right, so navigating FERC process and FERC's role. FERC is a independent agency, but under DOE. Okay, it's got, yes, I'm seeing nod from Colleen. Okay, I didn't mess up the wording that time. Wonderful. So it's an independent agency and it's got its Office of Energy Projects. Within that, there are 3 divisions that cover hydropower. So we've got our Division of Hydropower Licensing, Division of Hydropower Administration and Compliance, and our Division of Dam Safety and Compliance. When we're looking to relicense a project, you are working with licensing and dam safety and compliance. When you are looking to surrender, you are looking at DHAC, the Division of Hydropower Administration and Compliance, and dam safety. So that's important to note with who you're going to be talking with a lot. There will be someone or multiple people from FERC who are helping the licensee and stakeholders go through this license surrender process. Most folks here are pretty familiar with hydropower licenses and exemptions, so I won't go into great detail, but basically hydropower licenses are a binding agreement allowing the use of public waters, but they do have an expiration, and so they have to get relicensed after the term is up. And they need to give notification that they're going to relicense. I believe it's within 5 years of the license expiration date, the licensee needs to notify the public whether or not they want to proceed with relicensing. And we can go from there. So we mentioned earlier, when's the most impactful time to get involved? Now, when folks are leading up to relicensing. In case they're considering removal, now is the time to start advocating for that, if that is something that the licensee should be considering. Exemptions from licenses are a different animal. These are generally for smaller projects that FERC considers to have minimal impacts, and they don't have an expiration because they are considered to be small and minimal. So that just requires the licensee to determine that at some point their project is uneconomical or unsafe, or they don't want it for whatever reason, and then they'll go through the surrender process. Both hydropower license and exemptions go through the same surrender process. The FERC docket is the final one here that we want to talk about, and that is the FERC maintains a public electronic library of all documents, all filings and comments related to their regulated projects. And the collection for each individual project is a docket. So you can go online and you can search the docket and figure out what's going on with each project and track it. You can also file comments to the docket. And FERC has developed this incredible resource called the Office of Public Participation. And they have a lot of resources on being able to file comments, on how to file powerful comments even. So we're not going to dive into that very deeply here. I just want to let you know that there are more resources on each and every one of these. Navigating the license surrender process. So if your license, we've got to yes, we want to remove. Now your licensee needs to surrender the application. And this is very project specific. In the license application, they need to have a decommissioning plan. That decommissioning plan needs to tell FERC how the licensee is going to remove the project's ability to generate power. Are they going to just disconnect it from the grid and then lock the door and walk away? Because that technically is one option. Or are they going to remove the project, all project components, and do a full restoration to pre-project conditions? Wide variety in options of decommissioning. And most folks who decide to go ahead and remove the project and restore it to pre-site conditions need support and help and resources from stakeholders and tribes. So they're not always going to be able to, or have the capacity to be able to do this on their own. So they need support from external parties to be able to go through that removal. This license surrender application has the 4 components described in great detail in the guide. I want to highlight a general flow chart that I made up. This is a very general flow chart. So all license surrenders are different because they're very project specific, and the requirements are different depending on what the licensee is doing with them. So a license surrender application might be more simple for someone who's just going to surrender it in place. For someone who's going to remove it, FERC is going to go through those removal plans, and they want to make sure that it's being done in a safe way and it's being done responsibly, and they'll go through this. There'll be a lot more back arrows in this too. So we go forward, and then I'll come back and forth, and they want to make sure that they have a full picture and a full understanding. Another thing worth noting here too, in why this can take a little bit longer, is that there's the baseline status. So that's something worth knowing about, is that as the project is, that's considered the baseline status. Any changes to the baseline require the NEPA documents, so your environmental documents. So if you're removing a dam, you're changing the baseline status, and so then you need more NEPA documents. So there's just a quick explanation as to why it could take longer. So what does this look like for our timing? It looks like you're trying to have a lot of different things move together all at once. If you will, imagine a very, very braided stream with lots and lots of different channels, some that have moving water, some that don't look like they're moving very fast, but there's a little bit of flow, right? And they're all moving in and out together. So I would love to say you do A, then B, then C, then D, and then you're done and your dam's removed and we're all done. You can carry on with your lives, but it doesn't work that way. Engaging with the licensee can take time. Securing funding takes time. Surrendering the license takes time. Removing the dam, actually, once you get the construction equipment in there, it doesn't take very much time, but everything else does. So getting the plans to remove the dam, making sure your sediment control plan is thorough. All of these take a lot of time, and they're overlapping. And it's different for each project. I don't have this is how long it takes, because it really depends on when you start the clock, whether you start with engaging with the licensee or from the time the license surrender application has been done. But what I tried to do for folks is I went through and I made a timeline for all the case studies. So you can read through and look and figure out when all of these items happened for those projects that were successfully removed and how that could relate back to the project that you're working on. All right. I interviewed dozens and dozens of people, and at the end of each one, I asked them, what are the top 3 things that you would like to tell somebody who's working on a project? And these are the ones that floated mostly to the surface, is get involved in the licensing process early, subscribe to the docket, start talking to the licensee, and be a great partner, collaborate, communicate early on, and communicate regularly. Grab coffee with folks, go meet them in person, go visit the site, find funding, have it be for a long time if possible. Extend that window of how long you have to use the funds, because this can take a while. Stay creative. And I would also add in here, stay focused. This takes a while. It is difficult, and it is possible. So it has been done nearly 50 times. It will continue to be done, getting done, and resources are out there and available. So as a quick review, we covered dams and dam removals in the United States. Well done. We covered why remove hydropower dams. Well done. We covered navigating the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission process. Well done. You guys get it to duh. And now we get to see everyone's faces. Before we do that, I want to point to a quickly that the HRC resource library has the practitioner's guide to dam removal on it, and many, many more resources. I swear that I've been on that website at least once a week, if not once a day, for the past several years. So thank you, Colleen, for maintaining an amazing library, and thank you all for your attention. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing so that we can start our lovely discussion, which I'm very much looking forward to.
Katie, thank you so much. Wonderful presentation. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording, and I invite you all to turn your cameras on.